You see them the second you pull into your own driveway. The dandelions punching through the green, the clover creeping along the edge of the walk, that one wide, ugly weed right in the middle of the yard where the whole street can see it. And you already know that if you go buy the spray that promises to fix it, you are about to hand over another $20 or $30 for something you have bought a dozen times before. Here is what I finally learned after years of doing exactly that. 1 cup of a single cheap ingredient mixed in a gallon of water will burn broadleaf weeds down to nothing while your grass drinks it up and turns greener. Not a poison. Not a name brand jug with a skull on the label. Something that costs about $2. I stopped buying the expensive weed sprays 3 seasons ago, and my lawn has never looked better. And I am going to give you the exact ingredient, the exact amount, and the university research that proves it works, but I am holding the best one for the end because the finale is the one almost nobody talks about, and it is the reason my grass beat my neighbor's professionally treated yard last summer. This works on the tired, weedy, established lawn you already have, not a fresh install. The one out your window right now. Let me take you back to the spring I finally snapped. It was a Saturday in April, and I was standing in my garage, looking at a shelf that held 4 different half-empty jugs of weed killer, 2 bags of fertilizer, and a hose end sprayer that leaked. I did the math out loud and my wife heard me. Somewhere north of $200 sitting on that shelf, and the front yard still had a crop of dandelions thick enough to bail. That was the moment I realized I was not buying results. I was buying jugs. I was a customer, not a homeowner with a nice lawn. So let me start with the thing that broke my brain first, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and it changes how you spend every dollar on your yard from here on out. Why does grass survive things that kill weeds? That question sounds simple, but the answer is the whole secret. For years, I assumed a weed and a blade of grass were basically the same kind of plant, so anything strong enough to kill one would hurt the other. That belief is exactly what kept me buying the pricey selective sprays. I thought the expensive chemistry was the only thing smart enough to tell them apart, but grass and broadleaf weeds are built completely differently, and that difference is free for you to exploit. Your lawn grass is a monocot. It grows from a protected point down at the base, close to the soil, called the crown. Its leaves are narrow, they stand up nearly vertical, and they have a waxy coating that sheds liquid fast. A dandelion, a clover plant, a plantain, a chickweed, those are broadleaf weeds, dicots, and they grow from an exposed growing point right out in the open. Their leaves are wide, flat, and horizontal, laid out like little dinner plates begging to catch whatever falls on them. So when you spray something that burns plant tissue on contact, the weed catches a full dose across all that flat surface, right on its exposed growth point, and it collapses. The grass sheds most of it off those waxy vertical blades, and the part that matters, the crown, sits down low where the spray barely reaches. The grass shrugs it off, the weed cannot. That is not magic, and it is not expensive chemistry. That is just plant shape. Once I understood that, I stopped believing I needed a special jug to do it. Therefore, the real question became a money question. If the difference between the grass and the weed is just the shape of the plant, then why was I paying premium prices season after season? And that is where I started to get a little angry, because the answer is not flattering to the people who sold me all those jugs. Think about how the lawn care business actually makes its money. It is not built to solve your weed problem once and be done. If your dandelions disappeared forever after one $2 treatment, they would lose you as a customer. The whole model, the retail shelf and the service truck alike, depends on you coming back every single season, buying the next jug, signing the next contract, paying the next application fee. A permanent cheap fix is bad for their business by design. A yearly expensive maintenance habit is the product. You were never the customer. Your recurring payment was. I am not saying every product is useless. I am saying that once I learned how cheaply I could get the same result, I felt a little foolish for how long I had been feeding that machine. A lawn service in my area quotes around $50 per weed and feed visit, and they want 5 or 6 visits a year. That is close to $300 a season to pour things on my grass that I can now make in a bucket for the price of a fast food lunch. But before I hand you the strongest recipe, you need the cheapest one, because this first mix is the one I reach for the most, and it costs almost nothing. Household vinegar, not the fancy kind. The plain white vinegar sitting in your kitchen right now, the 5% kind you can buy for about $3 a gallon. Vinegar is acetic acid, and acetic acid strips the waxy protective layer off a plant leaf and dries out the tissue underneath. On a wide, flat weed leaf sitting in full sun, that is a death sentence. On your narrow, waxy, upright grass blades, most of it rolls right off. Here is how I do it so it actually works, because most people use it wrong and then say it failed. I take 1 gallon of that plain white vinegar. I add 1 cup of table salt, but understand the salt is optional and I only use it on cracks in the driveway and along fence lines where I never want anything to grow, because salt lingers in soil. For the lawn itself, I leave the salt out entirely and just add a single tablespoon of dish soap. The soap is the part everyone skips. It breaks the surface tension so the vinegar clings to the weed leaf instead of beating up and dripping off. Without the soap, you are just washing the plant. Then I wait for the right day. This matters more than the recipe. You want a hot, sunny, still morning, ideally 80 degrees or warmer, with no rain in the forecast for a day or two. The sun is your partner here. Acetic acid burns tissue and the sunshine cooks the stripped leaf. I spray directly onto the weed, a light coat, enough to wet the leaves, and I try not to soak the grass around it. On a good hot day, I see the dandelions and chickweed wilting within hours and crisping up brown by the next morning. Now, let me be honest with you, because that reform spender honesty is the only reason to listen to me. Vinegar is a contact killer. It burns what it touches. On young, small, shallow weeds, it works beautifully and they never come back. But on a big old dandelion with a taproot, as long as your finger, vinegar burns off the top and the root can push out new leaves a couple weeks later, that used to frustrate me until I realized the fix is not a stronger poison. The fix is just hitting it again. 2 treatments a week apart drains that taproot's energy, and most of them give up for good. So vinegar became my everyday tool for the young stuff and the sidewalk cracks. But it left me with a bigger problem, and this is the one that had beaten me for years, the problem that no cheap spray on its own can solve. What about the weeds that have not sprouted yet? Because here's the hard truth I had to face. Killing the weeds you can see is only half the battle, and it is the easy half. Every weed I burned down had already dropped seeds into my soil, thousands of them. A single dandelion head throws off around 150 seeds, and a healthy plant makes multiple heads. Those seeds sit in the top inch of soil waiting for their moment. So I could spend all spring spraying, feel proud of a clean lawn in May, and by June a whole new army had sprouted from seed to replace the ones I killed. I was mowing the same battle over and over and never winning the war. That is when I found the research that genuinely changed how I think about my whole yard, and it came from a real place with a real name, Iowa State University. Back in the late 1980s, a turfgrass researcher there named Dr. Nick Christians was actually studying something else entirely, a disease experiment using corn gluten meal, which is just a leftover byproduct of milling corn, the kind of thing they sell as a cheap feed additive. And he noticed something nobody was looking for. In the plots where corn gluten meal had been spread, grass seed would not sprout. The corn gluten was stopping seeds from forming roots. He had accidentally discovered a natural pre-emergent. That means it does not kill a growing plant, it stops seeds from ever establishing. Corn gluten meal releases compounds that keep a freshly sprouted seed from developing its first tiny root. So the seed germinates, reaches for a root, finds nothing, and dies. Iowa State studied this for years, and it works on the seeds of crabgrass, dandelion, and other common lawn weeds. Their research found meaningful reductions in weed establishment, climbing higher in the 2nd and 3rd year as you keep applying it, and the weed seed bank in your soil gets smaller and smaller. And here is the part that made me feel robbed. Corn gluten meal has a bonus. It is about 10% nitrogen by weight. So while it is stopping weed seeds from taking hold, it is also feeding your existing grass a slow, gentle dose of fertilizer. It is a weed preventer and a lawn food in one cheap bag. You can find it at feed stores and garden centers, and it costs a fraction of the branded pre-emergent products that, frankly, are often trying to do the exact same job. Picture yourself standing in that same garage, staring at a shelf of half-empty jugs, knowing every single one was money you never had to spend. That is exactly the trap this whole collection was built to get you out of for good. It is called the Complete Lawn Fix System, and it lands right in your email the moment you grab it. Inside, Penny Lawn shows you why your lawn keeps losing and who is really to blame. Plus the 5 simple levers that do most of the work for pennies, laid out in a 30-day week-by-week plan any homeowner can follow. Deep Roots takes you further, fixing the stubborn problems at the biological level so weeds and bare spots stop coming back without you ever calling a service or signing a contract. And here is your free test tonight. Go check the shelf in your own garage right now, add up what those jugs and bags actually cost you, and then look up what a single lawn visit runs in your area. 50,000 homeowners already did that math and quietly walked away from the trucks for good. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. Spring and fall are the real windows for most of this work, so the sooner you have the plan in hand, the sooner you stop paying for a problem you can fix yourself. Now, before I hand you that strongest recipe, let me give you the cheapest one first. The trick with corn gluten is timing, and I learned this the hard way by throwing it down wrong my first year. You have to apply it early, before the weed seeds wake up. For crabgrass in most of the country, that means spreading it in spring when the soil is warming. But before it hits consistently warm temperatures, right around when the forsythia bushes bloom, which is the old-timer signal, I spread about 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet, water it in lightly to activate it, and then, this is critical, I let it dry out and stay on the dry side for a few days so the sprouting weed seeds cannot find the moisture they need to recover. And you do not put it down where you are trying to grow new grass seed because it will stop your good seed from sprouting too. It cannot tell the difference. A seed is a seed to corn gluten. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking right now because I thought it too, sitting there with a lawn that was already a mess. You are thinking, this is all fine for somebody with a decent lawn who just wants to keep it clean. But my yard is already wrecked. It is patchy, it is half weeds, it has bare dirt showing, and it has been neglected for years. This next part is for you specifically, the person looking at a tired, beat up, established lawn and assuming none of this applies until you tear it all out and start over. You do not need to start over. I am going to show you how to reclaim the lawn you already have, because here is what nobody selling you a full lawn renovation wants you to understand. A patchy, weedy lawn is not a grass problem. It is a competition problem. Weeds do not move into thick, healthy turf. They cannot. There is no room and no light reaching the soil. Weeds move into thin, weak, bare spots where sunlight hits open dirt. So every bare patch in your yard is not just ugly, it is an open invitation, a landing strip for the next crop of weed seeds. The reason your lawn keeps getting weedier is that the weak spots keep getting weaker. So the fix for an established, neglected lawn is not just killing weeds, it is closing the gaps so weeds have nowhere to land. And you can do that by hand this weekend for almost nothing. The method is called overseeding, and the old groundskeepers did it long before anybody sold you a program for it. After you knock down the visible weeds, you rake the bare and thin spots hard enough to scratch up and loosen that top quarter-inch of crusty soil so seed can make contact. Then you spread fresh grass seed right over your existing lawn, heavier on the thin spots, and you keep it damp for a couple weeks while it fills in. But let me give you the cheap soil trick that makes overseeding actually take, the one that turned my worst corner around. Instead of buying bags of topsoil to cover the seed, I raked in a thin layer of screened compost, the free kind you can often get from your own municipality's yard waste program for the cost of shoveling it into your truck. A quarter-inch of compost over fresh seed holds moisture like a sponge, feeds the soil, the weeds stripped out, and gives those baby grass plants a running start. My back corner had been half dirt for 3 years. One fall of overseeding with a little compost, and by the next summer it was the thickest part of my yard. And thick grass, it turns out, is the single best weed killer there is because it never lets a weed seed see daylight. Fall is the best time for this in most of the country, when the soil is still warm but the air is cooling and the summer weeds are fading, though early spring works too if you miss the fall window. The point is, you are not starting over. You are healing what you have, and every gap you close is a weed you never have to spray again next year. So now you have the whole system I use: vinegar and soap for the weeds you can see, corn gluten meal to stop the ones you cannot, overseeding and compost to close the gaps so they stop coming back. For years, I would have told you that was the complete playbook, and honestly, it would have been enough. But I promised you the finale, the one method that beat my neighbor's professional service, and this is the one I almost cannot believe is not on every shelf and in every guide. This is the buried one. Here it is. There is a single cheap ingredient that kills broadleaf weeds like dandelion and clover right in the middle of your lawn without harming the grass. And at the very same time, it turns your grass a deep, dark, showroom green. One product does the killing and the greening together. And it is not a herbicide at all, it is iron. Specifically, iron in a form your lawn can drink up. The one you can buy cheapest is ferrous sulfate, also sold as iron sulfate. a plain dry mineral you find in the garden section and even in some pharmacy and supplement aisles because it is the same iron people take as a supplement. It costs just a few dollars. And the reason it does what those expensive, selective weed sprays do comes right back to that first lesson about plant shape and plant chemistry. Turfgrass has a high tolerance for iron. It takes up the iron and uses it to build chlorophyll, which is the green pigment, so a dose of iron makes grass turn a richer, darker green almost overnight, sometimes within a day or two. But broadleaf weeds cannot handle a concentrated dose of iron the way grass can. That same amount overwhelms the weed's tissue and burns it, blackening and killing the leaves of dandelion, clover, plantain, and moss, while the grass around it just drinks it in and greens up. The selective weed killers the pros spray on lawns to control moss and broadleaf weeds are very often iron-based for exactly this reason. Research from turfgrass programs, including work coming out of the Pacific Northwest universities where moss is a constant battle, has documented iron compounds knocking down moss and broadleaf weeds while leaving the grass unharmed and greener. They found the lawn was the only thing left standing. Here is how I mix it and use it, and I want you to write this down. I dissolve about 1 cup, roughly 4 to 5 ounces by weight, of ferrous sulfate into 1 gallon of water. I stir it until it dissolves, and I use a plastic sprayer or plastic watering can, not metal, because iron sulfate will stain and corrode metal, and it will also stain concrete a rusty brown, so I keep it off the driveway and the walk. That 1 gallon covers a few hundred square feet. I spray it in the cool of the morning or evening on a dry day, coating the weeds and lightly wetting the grass, and I do not water it in for a day or two so it has time to work on the leaves. Within a day, the grass has darkened. Within a few days, the dandelions and clover and moss have blackened and shriveled, and it did not cost me $30, it cost me about $2. The first time I did this along my front walk, I honestly stood there the next morning thinking somebody was going to knock on my door and tell me I had cheated. The weeds were dead. The grass was the color it looks on the fertilizer bag, and I had spent pocket change. A couple of honest cautions. Because I will never sell you a fairy tale. Iron stains everything it touches a rust color, so keep it off concrete, brick, painted fences, and your shoes. Do not overdo the dose, because too much iron can temporarily darken or burn the grass tips as well, so I never go stronger than that 1 cup per gallon rate, and I do not blanket the entire lawn at full strength when I only need to spot treat weeds. And it does its best work on those broadleaf weeds and on moss. It will green up your whole lawn beautifully at a lighter rate, but for the killing power on weeds, you want that concentrated spot treatment right on the offender. Think about what that actually replaces. The service truck that pulls up and charges you $50 to spray a selective broadleaf weed control and then upsells you an iron treatment for a deeper green as a separate visit. You just did both jobs at once out of a $2 bag standing in your own yard in your slippers. That is the whole thing I wish somebody had told me 20 years ago, before I filled a garage shelf with jugs and handed a lawn service enough money over the years to buy a very nice riding mower. None of this is complicated. That is the part that stung once I understood it. A weed and a blade of grass are built differently, and every cheap method I just gave you simply uses that difference. Vinegar burns the flat leaf and rolls off the narrow one. Corn gluten starves the seed before it can root. Thick overseeded grass smothers the light a weed needs. And iron feeds the grass while it poisons the weed. Pennies on the dollar, every one of them, and all of it done by hand on the lawn you already own. What you just took back is not really about weeds. It is about being done paying a subscription for a problem you can solve yourself for the cost of a sandwich. You are the kind of homeowner who would rather understand how something works than keep swiping a card to make it somebody else's job, and now you have the whole playbook to prove it. The best lawn on your street does not belong to the person who spent the most. It belongs to the person who finally figured out how little it really takes. So tell me one thing down in the comments because I read them and I want to know. Which one are you trying first this weekend? The vinegar and soap spray, the corn gluten timing, or that 1 cup of iron on the dandelions? And tell me where you are watching from, because I love seeing how many of us are out here refusing to overpay for a good lawn. If you are one of those people, the ones who would rather keep the money and learn the trick, then stick around, because the next thing I am going to show you is the one soil mistake that quietly wastes half the fertilizer people put down, and how a 50-cent test from your kitchen tells you if you are making it. Do not go spend another $1 on your yard until you see that one. Here's the thing, this video gave you the overview, but I held the best part back. Inside the Honest Lawn Circle, I pick up right where I stopped the finale weed-beating ingredient, exact mix and timing. And you can ask me your own lawn questions and I answer you myself, a real person, not a machine. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime with one click. Now that your weeds are gone, let me show you something just as simple for those pesky anthills. One easy cup clears them out without hurting your grass. It's starting right here.